Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to do a review on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, famous for being the basis of the film Blade Runner. It is similar and dissimilar from the movie. This book is a masterwork, so you can kind of assume it's like deemed a modern classic. Published in 1968, it came out the same year as 2001: A Space Odyssey, which really interests me because it is essentially, at least aesthetically, diametrically opposed to 2001. Actually, both the interpretation and the movie for both films are pretty diametrically opposed in aesthetic as well. This is dirty, grimy. It is pretty well regarded as a proto-cyberpunk book, meaning it has a bunch of the motifs that cyberpunk has, just not all of them. Neuromancer was the first one to collect all of them and create the subgenre. And then, of course, there's other works throughout SFF history that have been the basis and are prototypical works of cyberpunk, as this is. So this has the same premise. The character's name is Rick Deckard. He is a bounty hunter rather than a Blade Runner. He hunts androids rather than replicants. It doesn't have the same expediency, I guess you could say, because the replicants in this, the androids, don't have a expiry date. Essentially, he just needs to do his job as fast as possible, because otherwise they will flee to a different area, and a different bounty hunter will be assigned, and he will lose that money. You can think of him as kind of like almost a waiter. He gets a very low minimum wage, and then his tips are the actual kills of killing these androids and retiring them, I think is still what they call it in the book. And so 6 bounties come in, he has to go, he has to do it. He is a single, married person. Right away we get clocked into this dystopia where it's post Third World War type situation. There's like atomic dust and fallout and stuff that has been covering the earth. Everybody who is anybody has left Earth to the colonies, and people who are unable to, or sort of like the essential workers, as this person is, they have to stay on Earth, kind of lamenting the fact that they are having to do so. They'd much rather buy into the propaganda of the colony that is much better. Androids are exclusively made for work in the off-colony. They're not allowed on Earth, and so if they ever do make it to Earth, then they're killed. A bit of murky world building here is that, ostensibly, they assume the identity or procure an identity from a human, which they then kill and then go to Earth. But it's actually never properly explained, as is a lot of the world building. It is really not too well thought out. We don't know what this all entails, but there are notions that are confirmed within the book about androids in high up places in society. And so if you think about the implications of that, especially after some of them have only been there for a month, how are they able to assume these positions? Do they body sculpt in order to look like the human? Like, do they kill a human and then use those papers of the dead person to create a new identity? None of it's explained. There's also a adrenal gland technological thing that is put into them where they're able to dial in different emotions, which is used at the beginning to establish the relationship that's sort of pretty, like, I would say boomer quintessential, where it's like the old ball and chain type situation. They like semi-respect each other, are fairly aggressive with each other, don't know how to communicate properly, etc. And then as soon as that is dialed in and kind of like used for that purpose, it's never mentioned again, even though he has dialed in the emotion. So is it short lasting? Does it last all day? What's going on with that? One thing that is introduced and is a through line is Mercerism, which is not in the movie. It is essentially the basis for interrogating religious beliefs and organized religion. And in this one, there's a cult built around Mercerism, or a person named Mercer, who has a device that enables people to connect through empathy. It's an empathy box. They put their hands on it, they go into some kind of simulation, which is, again, not very well explained whatsoever. They share in other people's emotions, and it kind of be like a shotgun effect. They could get anything in return, but it's a way to connect to other people, which they have not been able to do in their daily lives. They're very isolated, they lack empathy, and it is sort of asserted that lack of empathy is the way that the world ended and the fallout that occurs, which somewhat problematically, I guess in '68, I'm guessing they were seeing issues of fallout from the bomb, and this is sort of extrapolating some of the things, because some people are developing like special characteristics, is what they're called, specials, where they don't have a high enough IQ to function in society. They're relegated to like menial labor. They develop psychosis and stuff like that. And to some degree, it's effective in the story where it's paralleling the madness of society and how many people display lack of empathy. Some people are developing psychotic tendencies, some people are developing sociopathy, which is not what is alluded to here yet, because I don't think that science existed at the time, but the difference being two different things are still sort of explored a bit in this book. Deckard has to work his butt off, and it takes place in more or less a 24-hour period where he hunts down these people, and we see if he survives or not. The actual conflict, though, is an internal one for Deckard. He feels like he should have more of a problem retiring these androids than he actually does, and that causes a conflict and actual harm inside of him, which is paralleling this lack of empathy thing. And his one sort of goal, his beating heart of the book, basically, is trying to get a real-life animal, because he used to have a sheep. It was killed, it got like a disease of some kind, and he replaced it with an electric one so that people knew that he was like a good guy. It's both showing your exoticism, keeping up with society, buying the new thing, keeping up with the Joneses, as I said, but through live animals. So the more exotic the animal, the more interesting, the more different, the more, I guess, sort of society projects you have empathy for, and are just more cool, I guess, too. But it very much parallels his hunt for these androids and his ability to dehumanize them, even as the work that he does dehumanizes him, and he starts displaying the same characteristics of the androids, right? So it is a really effective thematic book. It's got some great ideas. All of the world building stuff that was fairly interesting either comes to a murky, strange end. Towards the end, there's a parallel with Mercerism that doesn't make sense. He is able to sort of ostensibly tap into this Mercerism, and it helps him out in a conflict near the end, but it's not explained how that actually happened. Like, you just have to roll with a lot of things in this book. But it is really good at displaying like an existential dread. The actual conflict that matters isn't the physical one that he has to undergo, but that society has warped and changed him. And the outcome of that one is far more interesting than the physical one, even though the story beats and the breadcrumbs are completely for the actual android stuff. So where this book falls a little bit beyond the world building is the actual prose, which were extremely disappointing to me. There's some good stuff when it is setting up specific scenes, but by and large, the majority of the prose are extremely incompetent, I would say. Like, There's reiteration of like a hovering hover car. There's like cringe B-movie level dialogue. There's a fair amount of sexism that feels like it should have a point but then isn't really validated. There are actions that come from some of the androids, especially Rachel, that don't feel like they are explored enough, because when she does something that's sort of out of character, it's interesting, but it isn't actually comes to any sort of resolution that you could come from the actual story when you consume it. You have to project your meaning onto that, which you think would be somewhat satisfying, but because everything feels so kind of incompetent that you're not sure if PK Dick actually feels like he's guiding you properly in the story. Like, he doesn't really have this. I buddy read this with a few great people like Gemma Books and Sarah Freshley and Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and everybody felt that it was like almost like a first draft or something like that. And for me, it was really disappointing because I thought that this would sort of vindicate for me that the literary scene was not kind of correct or right in taking so long to acknowledge the merits of SFF masterworks and classics. Yet reading this the entire time, I could think that they were correct. Like, even the ending was I'd say like a letdown for most people, even though I really liked it. It led to a crisis point of the sort of like nihilistic angle, and I quite enjoyed it just because that's kind of my jam. But it's true that, as everybody else said in the group, the story beats didn't telegraph that adequately. It is sort of a gotcha moment in the story that doesn't actually work because it deflates all of the tension from the narrative and then gives you that moment, which again is kind of incompetent. So yeah, I'd be interested if you had read any PKD before, if this is sort of indicative of everything, or is this like exactly as I'm describing it, like not his best work, but for the themes at play. If it's not representative of his prose work or of other craft level stuff, then I would be interested to know what to pick up next by him that would kind of redeem him in my eyes, I guess. But for me, for sure, the Blade Runner adaptation absolutely trounces this. It makes every single point better, aside from the Mercerism, the religious belief, but I don't think it actually needs that anyway. Much better, much more succinctly, much more emotionally than this does. It's a strange beast. I'm glad that I have it. I'm not saying that I own it. I'll probably revisit in the future at some point, especially distanced from the disappointment that I have occurred from it. But just because Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies, it's very interesting what I think I brought to this reading of it. Maybe people that haven't seen Blade Runner would enjoy this a lot more than I would, just because they don't have to compare the two, which I was doing constantly. It was fun seeing bits of dialogue that appeared in both films, if a little bit tweaked, similar themes, different plot beats at play, and on that front it was still a very enjoyable read, and it manages to say something a lot better than I expected with that sort of gotcha moment. But the gotcha moment kind of worked for me, whereas with other people it didn't. It kind of reminded me of Ursula K. Le Guin, where she's presenting a conflict in a zigzag kind of way. Like, you expect the physical conflict to be the big thing, but it's not. And that works for me, even if it's a little bit clunky. So let me know your thoughts, and otherwise I will see you next video.